So today's project is I want to remove the information center out of the Jeep, and I want to use that location for some gauges. So I removed that out of the Jeep, and then I removed all the guts out of that information center. There's like a computer board and stuff like that. Took that all out of there, and then I just fit these gauges in place. So set it up for what we need to do to construct a bracket to go in there. So basically what I did was I drilled out the holes and installed these gauges here, and then basically reinstalled this into the Jeep just to see where it sits and everything. And then if it's a little bit off, if I've made a mistake, then I can make that correction when we build the bracket. The longest dimension here and here, and then we went from here to here, and then we cut ourselves a piece of metal, and then we match those ears that fasten it down. We've got two on the top, one on the bottom, and that again is here and here, and then on the bottom there. So we made those ears, and all we got to do now is we just got to tack those to the plate here. And if you're worried that this is going to distort or it's not going to be strong enough, what you could do is you get yourself a piece of metal, and you can make a gusset in here, especially on this long one. And just make a gusset in here, tack it to the face of the plate, tack it to the ear, and that'll make it more rigid, and then you won't have to worry about it flexing or distorting in any way. There's two sizes of gauges that I'm aware of. So these are for 2-inch gauge. So these are 2-inch holes, and you can get a 2 1/16 inch diameter gauge as well. So we drilled our holes in, and then we also wanted to make sure we got enough material in between here for our brackets, because these are the brackets that are holding the gauge down. So as you can see right here, we need enough room in between those two gauges that both of those brackets will be able to hold that into place. So once we've achieved all that, then it comes down to the gauge itself. So you can either have an electric gauge or you can have a manual gauge. This is an example of a manual gauge. As you can see, the orifice and the fitting. And what happens with that one is we've got some tubing here, and then it'll have out of our kit the nut, and there's a collet in here. And so you'll slide that onto there, and you'll hook it onto the gauge, and then you'll run this to the engine, and whatever location you've chosen to take your pressure from, there's some more fittings in the bag to hook onto the block, and that's your physical connection from the block to the gauge. That's for the oil pressure. Now if you're going to go with the temperature, it'll be the same thing. It'll be the temperature probe that bolts into the block, and then you physically have to run that all the way to the gauge. So those are the manual gauges. Now, if you're going to go with an electric gauge, like these ones here, you're going to have a battery positive that comes to the gauge, and then you're going to have a wire that comes from the gauge, and then it's going to go to the sender. A wire from battery positive to the gauge, another wire from the gauge to the sender, and the sender will be grounded out when it's screwed into the block to the engine, which should be grounded to the frame, and then that'll be how that is going to be hooked up. And the way that it reads it is there's a resistance inside the sending unit. When this diaphragm inside here moves around, then that's going to change the resistance, and then that's going to represent on the gauge what your pressure is. So here's an example of your senders. This is a sender, this is a switch, and this is a sender. So this is temperature, this is oil pressure, and oil pressure. Difference between these two right here is you can tell this is physically larger. So there's a diaphragm in there, and it will be able to read a larger range of pressure. This one here, because it's physically smaller, is basically designed to only come on when the pressure is low. Whatever that setting is, it'll come on, and then that is hooked to a light in the dash. So this is a switch, this is a sender. You don't want one of these for a gauge. When you do get one of these for your gauge, you have to do some homework and find out which one's going to work for you, because each one of these will have a different range for ohms, and if you select the wrong one, it won't work properly with your gauge. So if you didn't get a sender with your gauge, you have to do a little homework and find the right one that is going to work with it. And that's in both cases with the pressure and this one here with the temperature. Same thing with the temperatures. There's going to be resistance in there, and there'll be a range again for temperature, and you need to have one that matches. Once you found those, then you can hook them up into the vehicle. In my case, what I wanted to do is I just wanted strictly information for the transmission. So I want 2 pressure gauges and I want 1 temperature gauge. These are the gauges installed in the dash here. And this bezel, basically there's 2 screws, one there and one there. And that's going to be fastened to the portion of the dash that's right here with the glove box. So you just take those 2 screws off, and then now you have that bezel by itself, so you can take it on, put it on for fitment purposes here. And then there's 2 screws at the top and there's 2 screws at the bottom. You can see those. That's what I got going on. I just put it on there, fit everything in place, make sure it all fits and stuff. So then these are going to be my 3 gauges just strictly for the transmission. I got 2 pressure, 1 temperature, and then I'm going to have to find a location down under here and drill a hole so that I can route my wiring to the transmission. So now underneath the vehicle here, as we take a look at the transmission, I want to hook up one of my pressure gauges up to this part here, and that should be the governor pressure. And then on this side, I do believe that this is the oil return line from the cooler, and that might be a good location to hook up the temperature after it's gone through the cooler. And then you can tell if you've got a problem, if it's not being cooled properly or if the temperature is too high. Okay, very hard to see in here, but if we take a look, this is our front servo and this is our line pressure right there. So front servo, line pressure, and back here is going to be our rear servo. So that is the spot where we want to hook up for our line pressure. So after all those gauges are going to be installed, here's some information on some pressures. And your pressures are over here, and that'll help you understand your transmission a little better and its operation while you're driving and stuff like that, if you choose to go that route. If you want to put other gauges in there, same difference. You just put the gauges in that location and then hook them to wherever you want to take your readings from.